cost of semaglutide, a specific brand of semaglutide in the US is about $943 per month. And the same medicine costs $47 in Croatia.
I've seen a lot of programs that have developed medicines and strategies that didn't consult how patients ingest a product or how palatable is a drug, and therefore you having to go back and fix it later and delaying access for patients, delaying access to the drug, and increasing the cost of the program.
How would you explain to them the role of a market access person in the middle of all these complexities?
The role of market access. Market access is putting the ball on the field.
What if a meaningful life isn't built by becoming one thing, but by having the courage to becoming many things?
The shortest distance between two people is a laugh.
She's been a diplomat, a healthcare executive, an entrepreneur, a board member, and most unexpectedly, a comedian. Now, most career advisors would probably look at that resume and have a mild panic attack. But the more I learn about Jennifer Kane Burk Mosa, the more I begin to wonder whether we have misunderstood something important. Maybe fulfillment isn't always found at the end of a straight line.
We live in a yes but world. Yes but, yes but, yes but. It breaks the energy. It kills the collaboration. It shifts where we're going. Just by switching from yes but to yes and, you are almost like a sorcerer in your life, able to transform every room. The most unhealthy decision that all of us can make is retirement, because we lose that connection to something that gives us purpose.
She's Vice President of Strategic Partnership for Europe at Esra, a global healthcare advocate, entrepreneur, and co-founder of Viva Valley, an organization dedicated to helping older adults live independently and with dignity.
My favorite people that I've taught improv to are the people that are above 80. My oldest student, 100 years old. You know what she said to me? I love this so much. I wish I could have met you 50 years ago and I could have started doing this then. Because it becomes this antidote to loneliness. The most precious commodity that they have is time. And so what they'll say is, time is my gold, and so don't waste my time.
What do you think comedy can teach that leadership programs don't?
I still to this day remember when I was standing in front of 1,000 people with the chairman of Roche and something went wrong and I was like, well, it's a moment to improvise. And I used my improv skills and it worked.
And now zooming out, now looking at the broader picture. Jennifer, if you could redesign one part of healthcare tomorrow, where would you start?
Hold on. The story is going to unfold in a way that you never expected, therefore non-linearly, and it's going to be so much more exciting and so much more fulfilling than you ever expected.
Jennifer, welcome to Drug Diaries. You know, there's a piece of advice we've all heard at some point in our careers. Find your one thing, find your passion, pick a lane, specialize, commit, stay focused. And for some people, that's exactly the right path. But what if that's not the only path? What if a meaningful life isn't built by becoming one thing, but by having the courage to becoming many things? My guest today has lived a life that challenges some of our deepest assumptions about success, purpose, and identity. She's been a diplomat, a healthcare executive, an entrepreneur, a board member, and most unexpectedly, a comedian. Now, most career advisors would probably look at that resume and have a mild panic attack. But the more I learn about Jennifer Kane Burk Mosa, the more I begin to wonder whether we have misunderstood something important. Maybe fulfillment isn't always found at the end of a straight line. Maybe purpose isn't a destination at all. Maybe it's something we discover by following our curiosity, embracing reinvention, and allowing ourselves to evolve into different versions of who we are. So in today's conversation, we're going to explore trust, leadership, healthcare, aging, entrepreneurship, and yes, even comedy. Beneath all of those topics lies a much bigger question. How do we build a life that feels meaningful? Because whether we are leading organizations, caring for loved ones, or building businesses, or simply trying to figure out what comes next, we're all searching for some version of the same thing, a sense that we are spending our time on what truly matters. Jennifer's journey offers a unique perspective on that search. She is Vice President of Strategic Partnership for Europe at Esra, a global healthcare advocate, entrepreneur, and co-founder of Viva Valley, an organization dedicated to helping older adults live independently and with dignity. Jennifer, welcome to Drug Diaries.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Kaushik. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me on your show.
It's such a pleasure and an honor to have you on Drug Diaries today, Jennifer. And, you know, I was thinking that most people spend their lives becoming one thing, and you became several: a diplomat, healthcare executive, entrepreneur, board member, comedian. Looking back, Does it feel like a series of unrelated chapters or one continuous story?
Oh, it's such a good question. I've often had people say, "Oh, I'm looking at your career decisions, career choices, and wow, what interesting strategic choices you've made." Or what,
Wow.
how very calculated or how very strategic of you. And I really think that, in your introduction, you said so much of this is about curiosity and being open to what comes your way. And I really think that's how I've been living my life, always driven by this common red line of making impact, an impact between people, impact as a leader, impact for my employees, impact for patients and healthcare systems, impact for people, truly. When we talk about comedy, for example.
Yeah.
And I think it's really just being open and curious and grabbing onto those moments where we know we can learn something new.
Wow. Absolutely. And when people ask, what do you do? What's the answer you usually give?
It's a very good question because it depends on who's in front of me. It depends on where I am. Like I was
Yes.
at biotech day, and of course I'm a healthcare executive. I'm working in market access consulting because I know that drug diaries is really often talking about market access. That's one of my
Mm.
first professional loves, in fact, as well. And we talk about that from a business perspective. If I'm in a group of VCs and private equity, I'm talking about entrepreneurship, I'm talking about deal making, I'm talking about BD&L. If I'm talking to someone on the street, I might say, "Hey, I run a theater company here in Basel where we teach improv comedy to people that may not necessarily have a future on the stage, but really want to incorporate those skills
Yeah.
into their leadership journey." So it really depends on who's in front of me because all of those things, you're right, all those things together are a little like, what? Why did I do that? What? Yeah, exactly.
Right. And looking across all these roles, what's the thread that connects them all?
Yeah, the thread is definitely seeking impact. I think, often if you ask your younger self, like ask your 15-year-old self, what's that big dream? And for me,
Mm.
it was always, how am I going to use the skills that I have, the brain in my head, the heart in my chest? How am I going to use all those things together to make an impact in this world? And again, healthcare systems, people, populations, patients, really concertedly looking at that. I was very fortunate in the very early parts of my career to be able to get involved with the World Health Organization, with the World Bank, and to be able to really drive those initiatives forward in countries in transition, healthcare systems in transition, to support them as they were making very difficult choices fiscally, from an organization perspective, a design perspective. It wasn't always just about pharmaceuticals. It was also about
Mm.
designing healthcare systems to ensure that those who are going to need it are going to be able to get access to the care that they required. And I think that, that thread even goes all the way up when you speak about entrepreneurship.
Yes.
When I had the opportunity to jump in and co-found Viva Valley, I was able to look at, well, if we look beyond sick care, right?
Mm.
Healthcare, sick care, and we look at community-based solutions that are so necessary to enable everyday living, and who is the most vulnerable in that population. We know that, 6,000 people in the United States every day are turning 65, right? So that is a growing bubble that is going to need more and more support. So having an opportunity to build something there to support community-based services for the elderly was really super rewarding. And it was also another part of public health for me.
Right. And I have a suspicion, and correct me if that is wrong, but I have a suspicion that your career isn't actually confined to healthcare. It's about understanding people. And yeah, do you agree?
Yeah, I think it is. And understanding people, whether that person in front of me be someone that I'm leading or someone that I'm supporting through an access program, a patient, a future patient.
Mm.
And I think, again, I have to really speak about the comedy because that was something that came along the way that was an unexpected gift of a diversion. Many of us have hobbies, or many of us in these opportunities that we have professionally are working so hard. And you know this, we're
Yes.
working in corporate careers. We're working, it's not a 9 to 5. We're working, 24/7. We're traveling for work. We're on planes. We are constantly working. So it's often you do work and you do home. And often the opportunity to have a type of hobby is squeezed out. right? So
Absolutely.
I took time to invest in my hobby, and it just so happened that my hobby was improv comedy and theater, community theater. And the surprise for me was the more I invested in that hobby, the more I realized it shifted who I was in this world, who I
Wow.
was as a professional and how I showed up every day. And now, as I said, we run a school here. We've been running a school for the last 6 years here in Basel. We've trained hundreds of people, and most of those people are never really truly wishing to be professional actors doing stand up, doing improv, doing sketch, ending up on Saturday Night Live, for example. That's not their they want to take it as a hobby, and as they start to do it, they realize that it's giving them the gift of becoming fearless truly in life, learning how to listen, learning how to collaborate, learning how to create cohesion in groups, in any group you define. If that's your family, if that's your team in your place of work, if it's your ensemble that you're performing with, you are learning how to gel with people really quickly. And I think that's really become a bit of a superpower that we can teach that, we can live that, we can perform that, and it's really quite profound, actually. And in your introduction, also you talked about the linear career,
Mm,
and I think where we are now, many of us have spent maybe 10, 15, possibly 20 years or more, depending
yeah.
on who's listening, in these fields where we feel very passionate, purpose driven. I mean, show me another person in, for example, in market access who isn't purpose driven. We're all doing this because we want to make an impact. And we're doing this getting out of bed every day because we want to drive access for patients. And I think many of us have taken, maybe we trained academically. Lots of people have PhDs, masters, health economics, market access, affiliated sort of careers, public health, etc. And we've had linear careers, and I think now that we have AI coming, and we
Yeah.
have this disruption, and we have new players who are entering the health space
Hmm.
inside and outside of the healthcare system. It now means we have new actors, not just performing
Yeah.
ones, but like new stakeholders that are showing up. And I think that actually being able to broaden oneself to be able to have those multi hyphenates in your CV, under your belt, in your bones, is actually going to serve someone in this career, even if you want to continue to serve healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said something really important there, that a third of our day goes in at work, and a third goes in sleeping, and a third in picking up the pieces, getting ready for work, commuting, or watching television. And there's no time for yourself to pursue a hobby. And it is so important to pursue a hobby. And I'm glad you're able to spend time to follow your passion, and that is amazing and very inspiring. So, Jennifer, what did diplomacy teach you about human behavior? I'm curious.
What did diplomacy teach me about human behavior? I think at the micro and macro level is that
Uh,
I think it's both, right? And
okay.
I think it bleeds out to the rest of it is that people are driven by incentives. Systems, professionals, anyone operating in a healthcare system, ultimately we are incentive maximizers. And whatever that's going to be. And so when you think about healthcare system design, ultimately what's the final impact that you're trying to make? What's the final
Yes.
outcome that you're trying to drive for? How then can you design incentives along the way that are nudging people that are often
Mm,
not the same stakeholder, but multi stakeholders that are working together towards a common goal, incentivized perhaps differently in order to get to that common goal? We're maximizing our incentives, every person, every individual. And when you think about that from the individual level as an input, and then that's one person, that's one group of people, that's one set of stakeholders. And then you have to link up, let's say you're making a drug, you have to work with others that are going to be distributing it, manufacturing it correctly with all the right safety elements in place. You're going to do the right distribution schemes. You're going to build the right incentives financially to nudge patients to use them correctly, for example. And I would say that that is just as relevant in global health, where I'm really happy to be a player in global health, as you mentioned, as well as working in like sort of the global north as well.
and what surprised you most when you moved into healthcare?
So when I moved from, I would say pharmaceuticals, because even before I was always working at healthcare one way or another, even
Mm,
as a young person,
right.
whether that be in delivering healthcare, truly, inside a doctor's office, working in a family business. So I got to grow up with probably one of the best teachers I've ever known and the best leaders I've ever known, which was my father, who was a family dentist. And I got to work with him side by side, treating patients on a daily basis. And so, I'd already been there and know what it's like to need to be competent and compassionate at the same time. And again, incentives. How do you drive people towards create incentives for them to have the best oral care, really, or health journey for themselves? So then into diplomacy and then going into pharmaceuticals, I think, the big challenge, or not the challenge, but to move from a world like WHO where effectively every country is the same, that you would
Mm.
give the same type. When I say every country is the same, every country would have the same type of support from the mothership of WHO, in terms of technical assistance, in terms of data assistance, in terms of, healthcare system development. Every
Mhm.
country was equal. And I think then moving into the world of pharma, really moving into the world of business, the business of healthcare, the business of making medicines, distributing them, going to market, commercializing, realizing that, the world of launch sequencing, for example, that some countries are going to get them first, and some countries, because we're going to be able to maximize the commercial opportunity first, we're going to have to go there first, and then we get to the smaller markets. I think that was both the big eye awakening, and I think also maybe disillusionment as well, because that was part of my frustration,
Mm.
that as someone who was a champion of global health, coming from that public sector world into the commercial world, seeing the limitations of the long tail of, yes,
Yeah.
eventually every patient will gain access to a molecule, but it just depends on when. So, it might not be within the first 12 months of an FDA launch or the first 12 months of an EMA approval. You might have to wait a long time if you're in an emerging market, for example. So I was really proud, for example, along my journey whilst I was working at Novartis to develop the emerging market brand, which
Right.
enabled us to put th- the most sort of crown jewel of innovation into the
Mhm.
hands of the developing markets within 12 months of an FDA approval. That was
Right.
revolutionary at the time. This is 10 years ago. And I know that both Novartis, although I'm no longer working for them, they continue to drive that program forward, and they continue to lead the Access to Medicines initiative, which is really a wonderful achievement for them that they continue to do that. But, finding that's been one of my big passions as well, is how are we going to find ways to make access as ubiquitous as fast as we possibly can, because patients are waiting, and patients
Yes.
don't have the time on their hands to wait for your molecule to go off patent and then to be distributed ubiquitously. So I think that's been one of the things. It's also one of the things I'm so proud about with the work I do with the part of the Gates Foundation, the Medicines for Malaria venture, because it is, the way that we bring the products to market through our commercial partners, both co-development and public-private development partnerships, as well as really co-commercialization, or rather they're leading the commercialization. They're putting it right in the hands of endemic countries from launch. And so that's that's something I'm really quite proud of, that I'm involved with that. I'm 6 years in. I've got 6 more years with them. So that's super exciting. And I think all of the industry can continue to learn from a model like that
Mhm.
in terms of public-private development partnerships. When you have open source discovery and then you have collaborative development where you're co-financing it with sovereign wealth funds, with big pharma, with multiple partners in terms of financing the phase one, phase two, phase three, and then putting it in the very capable distribution hands of the large pharma companies who have the ability to scale that distribution safely, effectively into markets where it's absolutely required, and to do it actually, quite controversially, in endemic countries without a patent, where it's patent in the global north, but it's actually
Yeah.
patent free in the global south. So I think we all can learn from that model. That was very much championed in the COVID era in terms of vaccine development, the public-private development partnerships. I see that that's something that could continue to limit risk that we have in this incredibly risky model from a financial perspective. That, you bring a molecule to market, the hit rate is still very low. We know that the investment required to get that molecule all the way through to phase three is still very high. The billions keep racking up. Is it one? Is it two? Is it 2.3 billion to get a product to market with still no promise of commercial success or full access success. That's where those of us who work in access come in, because we are working on, the accelerated access programs. We're working on the tiered pricing programs. We're working on unique models that we can have with governments to bring product to patients quicker.
Right. And what you just described there is one of the most complex ecosystems. And sometimes it can be very challenging to move forward with so many stakeholders involved. And I've had the opportunity to be part of one such large initiatives of public private partnerships in population health management in Africa, where I worked in very, very closely with a pharmaceutical company to design and conceptualize this program, which was rolled out in Kenya, and we were working with PSI and Japaigo and Empath and working with their electronic health records, trying to get access, working out the overall methodology for reaching out to the patients, generating awareness, and creating the traffic towards diagnosis and so on and so forth. And it's massive. I think the complexity of these projects is ginormous. So what has been your experience so far in that regard?
So, if we're speaking about global health and specifically activities, as you cite in the global south, for example, programs in Kenya, I think that there's leaps and bounds that we've made over the last 10, 15 years to
Right.
do better. And when I say do better, it even starts from development, where you might already see that you've got a way to start to separate your development program so that you have different formulations that will be more heat stable, will be able to be self-dosed. And you can have the same molecule that's developed with a formulation that's more suitable, or start to have commercial partners earlier that can do the distribution in those places that are so critical to generate access. And I think also, the value and the importance of patient voice in those
Mm,
early stages of development, where we're talking about the experience of not just the PROs that we collect as a part of endpoints, which are
yeah.
essential. It's also understanding what's the patient experience of being in that trial. What's the patient experience of taking the medicine? Because we're finding out new things about them in terms of
Mm,
activity that could be in subpopulations, sub-ethnic populations that could have higher or lower efficacy in them. So I think we've come really far in that sense. And so you speak about these stakeholders that were involved in Kenya, and some of the things I've learned from speaking directly with ministers of health, ministers of finance, with the African Union, with the African Medicines Agency, what we see is that if those programs are developed without the collaboration from the beginning,
mm,
they're bound to fail, even though they have the they're designed with the most amount of empathy. They're designed with fantastic targets. They're designed with the greatest intention to create access quicker. If those are programs that are developed in, let's just name some cities: New York, New Brunswick,
yeah.
Basel, London, Brussels, if those are designed in those rooms without the direct collaboration of the stakeholders locally who are going to be consuming the product, taking it to the healthcare system, distributing it, we know that they're bound to fail, which is such a sad thing because we have so
Yeah.
much interest in doing that. And so, I think the record scratch moment of this is, if that's your plan, if you're trying to create an access program for a new chemical entity, for a new
Mm,
indication in a high endemic country that happens to be in the global south, please do your best right now to bring in the stakeholders that are going to be prescribing, distributing, managing, financing those today, because then you're going to be able to create a system that's going to be sustainable to be able to reach patients as you intend.
and that brings us to a very fundamental question that, if we look at healthcare, it's full of brilliant people with great intentions, and they work really hard. But yet, if you look at it from patient's perspective, they experience confusion, delays, and frustration and fragmentation. So, what do outsiders misunderstand most about healthcare?
So, what do outsiders misunderstand about healthcare from a patient's perspective? I'm going to repeat
Patient's perspective.
the question,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
that's okay.
Correct.
So, I had a very engaging and eye-opening session at the World Economic Forum in Davos this year. We were speaking about the most favored nation, or MFN, which is the
Mm,
policy from the White House in the United States about the future of drug pricing, and the future of both drug pricing ex-US and also in US. And the Partnerships for Patients International was sponsoring this. And so I brought together a panel of sort of large pharma companies, small biotechs, some people in private equity, and then we had representatives of HTA agencies from across Europe and also in sub-Saharan Africa, and we had some patient representatives. And what was interesting was patient representatives, all of this discussion we were having around how are we going to get behind MFN? How are we going to manage this? How are we going to manage launch sequencing? How are we going to manage the future of development? Where are we going to commercialize? How are we going to solve these access gaps? For them, it was, you guys are just talking above us. You're not listening to us. This is actually what we need. This is really how we are suffering from a out-of-pocket perspective. This is the level of copayment that I have. This is the personal struggle that I'm having to gain access to this drug or to this treatment through the insurance pathway that I have to navigate in my country, whichever country that was. And I think very often we're talking about patients, we're not talking with them. And that's also why I keep resounding that we need to go back already to development, put patient representatives or patients that are a part of this disease pipeline that you're
Mm.
creating a treatment for, put them on your board of clinical trial. Make sure that you have
Right.
them looking at the trial design, at looking at the endpoints, looking at what's your distribution model, talking with them. And this is also, I think, I might even jump a little bit back and forth between some of these different sectors in my own life, because I think I bring some experience from that. One thing that when we were developing Viva Valley is we decided instead of just designing a tech solution for seniors,
Mm.
for example, knowing that that is kind of health adjacent, it's not healthcare, but it's health adjacent. One of the things we realized was we were so eager to design something for
Mm.
them. And we actually, in the early days, in the first months of the program, we actually stalled and we said, let's actually get very curious about the problem. Let's get very passionate about
Yes.
understanding the problem that we're trying to solve. So let's go and let's do ethnographic research with patients. And what that meant was we ended up having a 3-month study where we put cameras in patients' homes, a study that was actually multi-country, where we could do video diaries. We could understand how they interacted with their life, their home, their family, their community, how they traveling. And with regards to technology, how were they interacting with technology? How did it help or hurt? Was it a help driver for support, or was it a hurdle for trying to manage their day? So it was getting really curious about how they just navigate that world. And once we did that, then we could actually design the solutions that they truly needed. And then we kept them on our design board at every stage of all of our tech. And they were always doing beta testing on everything that we brought to market, which was very, very interesting. So look at that from a pharma perspective when we're developing a medicine. How do we then get really curious about a patient's daily experience? So very often the answer to that is, oh, let's do some focus groups, or oh, let's do, maybe we could do a qualitative interview and then we could do some quantitative interviews and get some patient experience. We'll do a study. All that's valuable. I'm not saying it's not valuable, but what we're often doing is we're asking from a preset set of questions. And therefore,
Mhm.
we've already biased what the outcome will be because we've already shut off what the potential is of what's their experience. And so I think, therefore, that, are we open to really widely watching? This is why I'm such a passionate fan of ethnography. And I've seen it be used actually in a pharma company, which then actually transformed the development program of an asset, of a program in hemophilia.
Right.
So I can't call out names, but like in a specific, disease area where we had to understand what are the hopes, dreams, fears of a patient on a daily basis, and therefore how do they interact with their medication, and therefore how do they interact with their healthcare system to live a life that feels normal to them.
Right.
And so once you understand that, you develop a different medicine. You bring it to market differently, you partner differently, you distribute differently. You have different access programs as well because you understand at the core patient level what they're trying with,
Mm.
again, their hopes, dreams, and fears that they're trying to overcome and solve with interactions with their healthcare system. And then from an market access perspective, as we're speaking
Yes.
with market access professionals, we design a different type of evidence platform. We collect real world evidence prospectively quite differently as well, because we're
Mhm.
trying to understand both, let's make sure we go from efficacy to effectiveness and make sure that we're pulling those results through from a clinical perspective. And we're continuing to pull results through from a patient well-being perspective. And then that's, this virtuous loop that we then feed back with evidence back to our payers that we have to secure the access and hopefully grow access for more patient population.
Right. I think I have a few questions from the previous response. I think, and they're branching out. So one is on the topic of MFN, and second is if you were to take a step back and explain what Viva Valley does
Yeah.
to someone who doesn't know about Viva Valley, how would you explain that?
Oh, yeah, sure. So Viva Valley is a company that's based out of the US that supports older adults to enable them to live at home independently. And like I said, it's not a healthcare company, but it's sort of health adjacent in the form of, let's say, for example, you have a family member who's had a hip fracture, they've been in the hospital, they have to go home and they need someone to support them. Well, what I'm going to assume, like you and me both, Kaushik, you
Mhm.
probably live very far away from your family. I live thousands of miles away from my own father. And so in order to support him, either need to get on a plane
Mhm.
and be there, travel 24 hours to get there in order to support him, or I can provide remote services. Now, remote services, do I know them? Do I trust them? The core currency there is trust,
Mm.
especially because these are the most vulnerable people in our population now. As we've seen, there's so much fraud that's unfortunately been lobbed towards olders themselves. How do you then find services that support their daily living, food delivery, rides to get back and forth from therapy, for example, home modification, home safety assessments, home modification? And, especially in the United States, every medical record now is digital. So my chart
Mm.
is a digital experience. And for an
Right.
older person, that pathway into even accessing their medical records or accessing their appointments, or even if they're having a virtual appointment, it's going to be through my chart. And we're very lucky that we have very savvy olders with tech, but majority of
Mhm.
them are not. So finding ways that you can provide those are the services that we provide. And they're all vetted and trained. And so, for example, if someone was going to utilize one of our services, we would then have a report back. We call, they check in before they interact with our customer. They check out. We call them immediately, make sure they're okay. We can report back to the family that they're okay as well. So quite revolutionary. We're actually taking a bit of a pause at the moment because I think we need to restructure and refocus a little bit. Yet we know that the demand for services like this continue to grow on a daily basis.
Yeah.
You said you also want to talk about MFN. That's kind of
Yes,
in
yes,
here.
we are
Yeah,
going back and forth
yeah,
between
yeah, for
switching
sure.
between two different topics, but on the MFN, and I know it's a bit controversial. So what's your view on MFN? What do you think about MFN policy?
All right. That's what's my view on MFN?
Yeah, and
How about
maybe I
start
can
with
I can I I can set some context maybe if that helps. Because recently I was attending the EPA conference and I saw one of the posters and I saw that the cost of semaglutide, a specific brand of semaglutide in the US is about $943 per month. And the same medicine costs $47 in Croatia, which is really unfair. And so policies like MFN, they are trying to make things fair. So how did we get here? How
Yeah,
did we get so wrong in terms of pricing the products?
yeah. So how do we get so wrong in price? I'm going to change that a little bit
Mm.
because I'm going to invite us to look at it slightly differently because I'm going to get philosophical. Sorry.
Sure, sure. No, please, of course.
Healthcare system is the ultimate expression of political values. And that is to say that, I'm sitting here in Europe. I'm working largely in Europe. I come originally from the United States. The United States is a libertarian country. That is the freedom. Libertarianism is the thing that defines who that country is as a culture, really. And therefore, the choice that you have in your health journey or your health consumption is really so absolutely critical to each individual. And therefore, the system that's built up allows everyone to choose whichever product they would like. The limitation is the cost. So
Mm.
anyone can access anything effectively. And during its patent period, and the good news is, as soon as that patent period is over, the United States is also the most efficient generics market in the world because those products will be dropped. The generics will enter at 10%, 20% max of the originator's price. Unless you're talking about biosimilars, whole other issue, right? But generally, they're coming radically cheaper once you go off, once you've enjoyed the privilege of your patent and you've been able to recover your investment. And again, you're talking about everyone can choose, everyone can get whatever they want, but the limitation is price. When you talk about social health insurance based countries, like we're talking about in Europe, generally you have universal access to everyone to a limited basket. Therefore, we have HTA to assess the value, to assess, to reward, to really deliver what is going to be valued by that society in, in both as at the continental level from a EU HTA perspective, but at a national level where you're doing your own health economic analysis and you're deciding, are you going to put this on your reimbursement list for your country or not? You're making a decision of, with the limited budget that we have, considering that everyone who's going to be eligible for this drug is going to be able to have access, then we're going to have to limit what's being offered, right? And then of course you also have a limitation. The difference is not everyone is actually accessing that in the US. So when we start talking about these price differences, the thing that really gets under my skin is we're really never ever comparing apples with apples. It's sort of like apples with, grapes or apples with tomatoes, because you're not comparing similar systems, because you're comparing one system that doesn't provide universal health care to anyone versus systems that do have universal health care. And so with those choices that they're making where everyone is covered, you're making decisions about limiting, again, who's going to have the access and also what drugs are going to be on the list there as well. Plus you have all of these under the table discountings. So you're not comparing systems that are the same. So also when you start to look at in the US all of the rebates that are happening from the PBM level, from the fund level, you do start to see prices that are starting to converge. So that's another thing that's part of it. The other element, and you've heard, you were at EPA earlier this year, we had posters there, we had panels talking about the same kind of things where we were addressing this with payers from across Europe as well as some pharma players in that. And it's that to say, using the language of FBA right now and the campaign that's going for FBA is Europe has a choice. Europe has a choice at the national level and Europe has a choice at the kind of meta level, at the continent level, to decide, are we going to have a pharmaceutical market or not? So even though we do have all the things I talked about, we do have some price differentials. Yes. So our price is going to be raised in Europe. Yes. No. Will industrial policy still have a place to play here? Will we have investments in the pharmaceutical industry here? We're seeing headline after headline that money is moving to where money is treated well. Right? This is what they'll say from the private equity perspective is money will generally go where it'll flow downhill to where it's treated well and received well. And so if an investment is more likely to be received better in the US or in China, that's where it's going to go. And so that's one of the big crises that we're seeing right now is in Europe is that we're potentially we won't have launches. I don't know if you saw the Reuters report that came out in early April that was looking at the number of launches that were happening in each market. We're down about 30% year on year versus where we were pre-MFN announcement in May of 2025. So in some markets it's higher, in some markets it's still running about 30%. The choices are that we're not launching in these countries. So, again, it's sort of a long-winded answer, but I'm concerned. I'm very concerned about access, number one. Are patients going to get access to treatments that they need, that they deserve, that they're waiting for, that they wish for because of where we are with MFN, because it's changing the incentive structures. Again, incentives, systems, companies, individuals, payers are moved by incentives. If the incentive to invest in other geographies is there, that's a stronger investment than in Europe, those investments will go there. If the investment for commercialization is stronger in other markets, they will also go in those places. And it's not just me that has this opinion. It doesn't take much of a Google search to look at, Politico, Reuters, the Financial Times to see any given CEO talking about how he or she is likely moving their financial investments elsewhere to places where those markets will be rewarding them, granting access and also commercialization.
Right. And is there a point after which pharma companies will be able to launch in Europe without having any implications on the price? Or Is that an indefinite thing?
I- the crystal ball would be so helpful right now.
Mm,
All what we're looking for, right? We're all looking for, there are some markets. I think about Denmark, for example. Pharmaceutical industry is 11% of their GDP. And so markets like this that have heavy investments in the pharma environment will continue to push forward and find unique ways. I really like what's happening with the MFN task force in Denmark because it's all the way up to the prime minister's level with the minister of health, minister of finance, every possible minister, including executives from the pharmaceutical industry, trying to come up with solutions. So I think that our opportunity to be creative is very open. The door is open for creativity and co-creation in these environments to come up with new methods of bringing access to patients and healthcare systems across the European continent. On the other hand, there are moments where we've been begging from an industry perspective for a revision to the NICE thresholds, right? So
right.
we've seen that through MFN. So it is a blunt instrument, and there are some moments where we're seeing transformations there through this blunt instrument to raise the threshold on equality. Therefore, the pricing will be raised from that perspective as well. So I think, we're 1 year in. We've seen a reduction in launches in Europe. And I think this 1 year has been a testing moment, right? And a
Right.
lot of change. We have JCA now fully implemented, with the first JCA report just came out yesterday, for example. We've got that. We've got new pharma legislation that's coming, talking about how we're going to have to launch products within, 12 months of an EMA launch in Europe. And we have MFN. So there's so much that's happening at the moment. We just don't know. And I think so many of my industry counterparts have looked around and said, we're waiting. We're waiting. And the hope and the ambition is that things will change, and we'll get back to resume programming where we continue to have access ubiquitously, right? But for the moment, we do have companies that are rethinking launch sequence, are rethinking launches in certain countries because they are in an MFN basket.
Right.
So I think, I have hope. Hope is not a strategy, but I have hope. I have faith that things are going to change because patients will demand this. And I think, again, the opportunity for creativity all the way up to the Prime Minister's office. I know the IFPMA is doing an excellent job engaging with all the way up to the highest of levels of government to try to find incentives
Mm,
to continue to allow pharma companies to launch their products in these places so that we don't have a disruption for our patients.
right. A lot of audience of Drug Diaries come from a non-pharma background. They are students who are perhaps pursuing an aspiring career in pharmaceuticals, and they do watch content quite regularly. So if a person, an audience, is watching the show right now, how would you explain to them the role of a market access person in the middle of all these complexities? What are they doing, and what is it that they can control when
Yeah.
all that is going on?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the day of filming today, the day's date is the 10th of June. This week we have the start of World Cup, right? So
Yeah.
we're in a World Cup year. So let's talk about football for a second. So when we think about the role of market access is putting the ball on the field. So,
Mhm.
your regulators are there. They're they're creating the rules, they're bringing the referees onto the play. We've established our rule of play. We've established how many players we're going to have, the timing, the regulations for the grass, et cetera. That's all set by our regulators. If we're looking at scoring goals, you can't score a goal until you put the ball on the pitch and you have your kickoff. Access is the function in the pharma industry that enables that ball to be placed there for the kickoff. Now, and again, that's a metaphor that, again, if you say that there are people who are listening who don't necessarily understand the world of market access, that's ultimately is do we have the ability, not just the marketing authorization to say we could potentially launch a product without having pricing, reimbursement, and agreement of how many patients are you going to serve, what's your price, will you be allowed to sell on your market through again, we're talking about European markets, through a government-sponsored insurance program versus self-pay, because again, most of these products we're talking about, patients are not going to pay out of their pocket for a cancer drug, for example. You're going to need to access that through some form of insurance. So either you're talking about, systems which are mediated by a government insurance or a private insurance. You still need to have negotiations of what's going to be your price, what's going to
Mm.
be your volume, who's the target patient that you're targeting as a result of the label you've been given by your regulator, who's like legally allowed to have it, and therefore we negotiate who will have it at each individual market level. And so that is, again, for those of you who are learning access, do it. It's the
Yeah.
best career ever. It's so much fun. It's absolutely everything you could possibly imagine. But I'm also talking about one point in the cycle of access. So if we really want to get broad, because I think that's important, because if
Hmm.
you're, for example, listening to us and you're in an early stage biotech, you might say, Jennifer, I don't need to listen to you right now because we're 4 years away from launching this. I'm going to turn it off. Thank you very much. We're not launching until 4 or 5 years down the road. Great. But let's say you're starting your phase 2 or you're starting your phase 3. Already the work of access is already beginning. And what does that mean? When you have your target product profile, when you have your trial design, it's the access individuals that are actually working with you all along your life cycle, as early as trial development in phase 2 and phase 3, to look at what's your comparator? Do you have the right comparators for the markets that you wish to launch in? Have you interviewed payers to say, are these the right comparators to compare your drug, let's say 5-10 years in the future? Do you have the right comparator? Are you putting in the right endpoints that a government or a payer, insurance, is going to care about from a primary endpoint perspective or secondary endpoint perspective? Do you have patient-reported outcomes that capture patient's voice along the way? Have you there and have you also sort of modeled out the future of how you might engage with health technology assessment? Because that already is the battleground. Your phase 2 and phase 3 trial design is already the battleground for those things. Because once you get those done, you're not going to go back and make a new trial in order to satisfy HTA because you're already done and your investment's already sunk. So it's really it's the work of access is starting really, really early. And you are doing that work already with trial design, with TPP, you're testing with payers, you're doing potential, you're looking at price potential, you're looking at potential launch markets, you're looking at all of your comparators. Where are they going to be with price? Where are they going to be with access? Where are they going to be with future indications if you have an asset that has multiple indications, which most do now? And so you're doing that. You're pulling that forward all the way from phase 2 and phase 3. And then as you're moving forward into phase 3 and you're looking at, well, there might be some gaps. We always might identify that we've already designed the perfect trial, but there's something that we forgot. So how are you going to rectify that in the future? Are you going to create real world evidence? Again, virtual head-to-heads you could do from an in silico perspective, or you do the prospective analysis. Do you have databases? Are you continuing to make, let's say, data rivers and data oceans, not just data puddles, that help you understand how your product will perform in the future versus those comparators either that you have in or that you have missed in your clinical trial? So again, I'm spanning this whole phase of access. Again, we put the ball in the pitch, and you can start to score points or score goals, sorry. You need to continue to work on whether you can maintain that access. So as you continue to have additional studies, as you publish your real world evidence, are you actually able to expand your access, protect your price? Because governments, insurance, etc., will continue to reevaluate your asset even though you're in market. So 2-3 years out, you're going to have a constant reassessment of your product, maybe the class, maybe a new comparator comes, new competitor comes, and that might disrupt your space. So you'll be continually doing that. And it also depends, where are you in the world? Are you in Germany? Are you sitting in Singapore? Are you sitting in the United States? Are you sitting in a global strategic team? You're doing different things. If you're doing the reassessments, you're doing that at the local level where you're actually actively negotiating with payers. if you're designing the future real world evidence, maybe you're doing that at a country level. You could be doing it at the corporate level as well, the global level. So access is just a fascinating field for anyone who wants to get involved, because you're never going to get bored. You're constantly learning, and you have to constantly dabble between a lot of different functions, and you're negotiating internally just as much as you're negotiating externally. And again, I'll make a leap, because this world of improv, and it may sound absolutely insane, but it started for me when I was working at Novartis. We would do improv as a kind of a fun thing, lunch and laugh, like get together, play around, do some of these things. And what we would realize is that we'd come back and we'd be super, super integrated with each other. Like we could read each other's thoughts on our teams. We could use the tools that we were using to play. And we were then able to make better kind of relationships inside these matrices that we're working in. And we were able to create new things together. And so this is, again, it comes back that if you're going to be in access, you need to equally be working on collaboration skills internally, collaboration, teaming, agility, really being able to constantly turn on a dime and work with other functions that don't understand the technical world that you're in. And so this is also to the downfall. This is a dominant theme of EPA this year, and I think I see it bubbling up also at ISPOR US, and I see this bubbling up also coming in other regional ISPORs, is the leaders in access functions saying, we figured out how to do this. We're technical people. We've done the work. We've done the models. We've done the pricing models. We've put it all together. We have the dossier. We have the value messages. We're going to market. And then you have to play well with others. And that's sometimes one of the biggest challenges internally, is how are you going to take all these beautiful babies that you've created and learn how to communicate with people that don't understand the technical stuff. And so this is sometimes a stumbling block as a career piece, where those who are really talented access professionals haven't learned how to go to the enterprise piece of the business to communicate meaning and storytell meaning about what this means to put the ball on the plate and what that ball is going to be worth for your company. And if you don't do X, Y, and Z to nurture that ball from an evidence perspective, from a medical perspective, from a key account management perspective, from a tender shaping perspective, from a commercial perspective, sales perspective, we're going to fail. So it's a series of skills. If you're looking at going into this field, which is constantly negotiating with other people that don't understand what you do. And that's part of the thrill, I think, of doing this, because you are constantly growing as a person, learning how to communicate more effectively with others.
Wow, that was beautifully explained. And I really love the analogy of the football. And it's so well explained. You made this complex topic so accessible for everyone. And a follow-up question. Now, while we are navigating through this complex maze, and if you were to zoom in, what would a typical day or a week in the life of a market access professional look like?
You will have a set of meetings that will be probably changed.
Right.
You might look at your outlook for your week. Your calendar is probably very full, because you're going to have, as I talked about, these different engagements with cross-functional stakeholders inside your company. So, a cross-functional team. You might be interacting with a lifecycle team. You might be interacting with a brand team. You might be interacting with patient advocacy or policy, or obviously medical. So you're going to be interacting with your time is going to be very filled with a lot of these type of stakeholder building and alliance building type of meetings. If you're lucky enough to have a product that's, let's say, 24 months out or sooner to launch, you might be talking directly to healthcare systems. You might be talking directly with stakeholders inside a Ministry of Health or inside regional payers. For example, you might be speaking directly to payers doing research, or working through consultants like what we do. For example, we do a lot of that work for companies where we go out and we do the interviews because they need to be double blinded. So the company doesn't know that it's who the company is, nor does the payer we're interviewing. So you might be interacting with that type of research. You might be commissioning new research. You might be trying to decide the strategy of evidence development post-launch. So you're going to be looking at that. You're going to be kind of looking at the moment in time, and you're going to be looking, let's say, 24 to 36 months ahead. And you are going to be living sort of both in today and in the future, with all of those stakeholders as you continue to bring that product to market, or if the product's on market, to keep it there by continuing to develop evidence that will be relevant for payers and for patients.
That gives a very vivid picture of how a day or a week would look like. And now zooming out, now looking at the broader picture. Jennifer, if you could redesign one part of healthcare tomorrow, where would you start?
How much time do we have?
As much as it takes.
I think if we're going to redesign healthcare from the very beginning, I think we're going to start with development of everything. We're going to put patients back in the center. And that's a very corporate statement. So apologies for that. And what I mean by that is I think we've done a lot of developing medicines, developing strategies, developing access programs, developing systems that seem to work to support the system, that seem to keep the system sustainable without actually keeping the patient's voice there, prevalent. So making sure that we have patients that are involved in making drugs, making sure that patients are involved in the access development, right? The access program and the pricing, access development, and distribution. I've seen a lot of programs that have developed medicines and strategies that didn't consult how patients ingest a product or how palatable is a drug, and therefore you having to go back and fix it later and delaying access for patients, delaying access to the drug, and increasing the cost of the program. So I think it's number one, get them there, because ultimately they are the ones who will be using the product. Efficacy isn't just a series of numbers, it's a series of people that are taking your drug that are actually navigating this. So I think there's the drug part. There's the insurance and access part. Are we making the navigation of the system and the navigating of how you gain access through your insurance program, whether that be government or private, are we making that clear so that everyone can make an informed decision that is clear, that they're not stuck with in a way that they don't, not just that they don't like or isn't working for them, but they understand how they're navigating. I have a relative who, Alexandra Kane Wildison, who runs a really wonderful podcast on chronic disease. And she is chronicling her story and the story of others who are also navigating chronic disease and inflammatory diseases, and how difficult it is to come to understand, what's the next best step? What's the next step? How do I navigate through a diagnostic process? How do I navigate through treatment choice? How do I navigate through tolerability issues? How do I navigate through getting a physician to believe me that my disease is real, right? So I think it's listen to your patients at every touch point. Get them involved. Help them co-design these systems. That's also why at Viva Valley, for example, we work directly with our customers to say, what are your hopes and dreams and fears? What are you trying to solve for? How do we help you make it better? And therefore, we designed a future for them through our services that made navigating their daily life better, easier, more interactive. So all of those things, I think it's such a simple thing, but we need to just listen to them and engage them and get them involved in all of the construction of every aspect of healthcare systems.
Right. And since you've brought in Viva Valley again, I'm going to go back there. And I think one of the mission statements of Viva Valley is to make people independent and allow them to live their lives with dignity. So,
Yeah.
what does independence really mean for an older adult?
Mm-hmm. So independence means, in our definition, it's enabling them to live at home as long as they wish. We know that there comes a point where your loved ones may not be able to live at home any longer because of the direction of their not just aging, but the direction of their disease process, dementia, for example. They're going to need additional help. However, there are those who wish to live at home. And in our studies that we did, 90% of people who are aging want to stay at home. And so many of us have this fantasy in our mind that we are going to be fully functional until one day we have a heart attack walking down the street and we die. And that is not the reality of aging. It's not the reality of navigating the world that we're in as we age. The reality is we're going to have little health crises that popcorn up throughout our life, and that each time those come, maybe there's a fall. If we survive that fall, because 16% of people will not survive that fall above the age of 65. So if you are surviving the fall, are you regaining functionality? And what is it that the environment around you can do to support your independence so you can remain independent? So is it that we have to manipulate your environment in your home, for
Mm.
example? Make sure that it's safe for you. Do we have to put in grab bars in your shower, for example, seats, those kind of things? Do we have things that make your environment safer so that you can stay home longer before you have to make a difficult decision, if it has to be made, to move to some form of assisted living? Now, again, this is a global issue. We are going to have this explosion of the aged, right? So we're not ready. The capacity, no matter what capacity we think we might need to provide for it, for care that will be outside of the home, it's not there. We're not going to have it. And so the reality is we're going to have to find ways to support holders at home. And is that going to be through our families? Is it going to be through community-based services? Because right now the system is not designed to provide the support that holders need to live at home independently. So that's the future that we see, is that we want to create systems in place so that they can continue to live at home if they wish to, and keeping it
Yeah.
safe.
Right. Yeah. That explains. And should we be talking more about quality of life rather than simply the length of life?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if between you and me, I don't want to live to 110. No, thank you. If I see right now what that looks like, I don't wish for that. So again, we're talking about health span. We're not talking about
Mm.
lifespan as much. So
Yeah.
the goal is, you know, that 10, the 10 healthy years you can get, between 65 to 75, or maybe it's 70 to 80, those really healthy years. How do we expand that to ensure that people are, again, independent? So if we study the blue zones, which are all over the
Mm.
world, and those are things like, when you study the patterns of how those people are living to 100. So blue zones are the highest concentrations of centenarians globally. And so there are common things that we see how those people live and inhabit the world. Yes, there's diet. So they tend to consume more fruits and vegetables. There's an exercise component. Yes, they continue to not even necessarily go to the gym, but they're active, physically active in their lives, just by navigating the world. But the critical thing that's through all of them is, are they socially engaged? Do they have purpose? So we know that the most unhealthy decision that all of us can make is retirement, because we lose that connection to something that gives us purpose. So if we retire, when we retire, do we continue to be engaged in something that's giving us purpose, that connects us to a community? Now, personally, I say that's the time. If you haven't been involved in the arts in your life, that's the time to
Yeah.
do it. Get involved in creation of art, fine art, pottery, painting, theater, do improv. I promise you, my favorite people that I've taught improv to are the people that are above 80. My oldest student
Really?
is 100 years old.
Oh,
You know what she said to me? "I love this so much. I wish I could have met you 50 years ago and I could have started doing this then." Because it
okay.
becomes this antidote to loneliness, because when you're doing improv, and I'll just give you a little thing, you say yes, like someone offers you an idea, you say yes,
Mm.
you believe them and you agree, and the and, yes, and you keep building onto that. You listen, you stay connected, you have to stay in the moment. You can't worry about the future and ruminate about the past when you're doing this. You are in the present, you're creating with someone, and you have the sense of community, boom, sense of creativity, boom, sense of purpose and connection, boom. You are not isolating yourself. And so
Mm.
what I found, especially when I've done this in retirement homes, for example, I see that the effect, and I hear back from the retirement home directors, is that, there's a good, like, long-term kind of effect to having an improv class with with these older people, in that they remain more interactive with each other for 5 days afterwards. That they linger a little longer after dinner. They linger a little longer at the coffee machine, the watering hole. They keep getting connected, and they remember what it was like to laugh together and to create together. Even the grumpiest of grumpy olders will say, "Thank you for coming, and you please come back." So I think it's a practice that becomes a superpower for anyone at any age. And I say yes for leaders. I've worked with very high level leaders in large companies all over the world now, teaching them how to use these skills on a daily basis as they interact with their teams and their environment. And I think it is something you can use at every age, especially with older people as well, and in healthcare as well. Say yes,
Yeah.
and
And you've worked a lot with older people. So what have older people taught you about life that younger generations often overlook?
the most precious commodity that they have is time.
Yeah.
Is time. And so what they'll say is, time is my gold. And so don't waste my time. And actually look at your own life and say that one life, the time you have, the time you spend, the choices you make with that one beautiful life, make that life the choice that you wish to make. And the other thing is, speaking about dignity, is
Mm,
that, they've already been us. They've been
yes.
us. They've
They've
been
been
every
us.
age. They've been the mischievous teenager. They've been the hopeful 20-something graduating from, their PhD program. They've been the ambitious 30-year-old building a career or building a family. They've been all those things that we are inhabiting ourselves. We haven't been them. Acknowledge them. I think this is the way I look at olders now, is that acknowledge that they've been in every phase of my life and that I can relate to that. I haven't been them. I will be them. And so have more respect for the kind of the beauty of who they are, that it's a gift that they've lived as long as they have. And so give them that respect and dignity.
Absolutely. That's very profound. And I totally agree. Jennifer, when I discovered you had attended comedy school, I thought that might be the most surprising part of your story. So, what made you decide to study comedy?
About 15 years ago, I tried it just for fun, just because it seemed like something fun. And from the moment I tried it, it bit its teeth into me. And I said, this is something incredible. I never thought I could do that. I never thought I could just go on a stage and someone could give me a word and I could create a show from that. I mean, it seems, especially in the world that we inhabit, right? We're talking to many people, especially in market access where we are, or in pharma where we're, slide driven. Let's prepare that 50 slide, 90 slide presentation for the meeting. Imagine going into a space where you know what you're going to do, but you have to ask the audience for a suggestion. And from that suggestion of a public place or a relationship or a lyric from a song, that is the basis for what you create. For most people, that's a terrifying thing. But obviously you build up to this. And it's, I think, the absolute wonderful aspect of being in community, being connected to people, and having that synergy where you can kind of operate as one mind. And
Hmm.
so as I got more and more into it, I realized that all of these qualities that I have learned to be able to operate on stage, they were just as relevant as a leader and just as relevant as a professional on a daily basis. And so I think it became this virtuous loop, which is so like when Ted asked me to come in and do the TED talk that I did on Yes and,
Yeah.
did two of them. They asked me to talk about it from how do you apply those lessons into the world of work.
Yeah.
And again, like in my suit, we've been running a comedy school here in Basel for the last 6 years. Most people that come to our classes are just, maybe they've read a Harvard Business Review or an Inc. article about improv and leadership, and they come because they're curious. And they always come back and they say, "Oh, I've learned this thing from you. I've learned how to navigate uncertainty. I've learned
Hmm.
how to navigate, agility as a word. I've learned how to develop my executive presence. And I'm fighting imposter syndrome because I know that I have nothing to fear because I can get through it." And so I think that's just been this just wonderful journey for me as an individual, as a teacher and as a performer and as a leader, to be able to keep having this virtuous loop of learning and feeding back. And yeah, I'm really very proud of all of it.
Wow. And what do you think comedy can teach that leadership programs don't?
Yeah, I think what comedy can teach that leadership programs don't is getting it in your body.
Hmm.
So really like how, like the physical process of learning, yes, and collaboration, listening, serving others, learning how to fail with joy. So one of the things about leadership programs is, I think, especially when you enter these leadership programs, you are acknowledged and you're tapped as, well, you're one of the top 20 leaders. So therefore, you're special, you're elite, you're going places. We know that we have you in the leadership pipeline and everyone's watching you. So we're going to give you these skills so that when you get there, when you're on the executive team, you're ready. So once you are sort of anointed in that kind of group, it's both exciting and it's a little bit terrifying because you know that everyone's watching you and the stakes become so high, you can't fail anymore. You can't fail. And that's when the practice of learning how to fail and not just invite failure, invite the recovery from failure really is where leadership programs often fail. And this is where improv fills in that gap. Because
Mm.
and I've had this talk with people like that who are anointed to be the next CFO of a major top 5 pharma company to say, everyone's watching you and how exciting. And now, because everyone's watching you, how are you going to get in your reps, like at the gym,
Yeah.
how you're going to recover when something goes wrong? You're in a meeting, you had the wrong data, or you're in the meeting, someone gave you the presentation's cut, Wi-Fi goes out, someone doesn't show up, someone misses their flight and you have to fill in, or you have an incredible tragedy in your community, someone in your staff dies. How are you going to manage that? Improv will teach you that you're going to be okay in moments like this where things go wrong, someone says the wrong thing or does the wrong thing, and all of a sudden you have to reset to zero. Improv is teaching you how to recover when you've had to reset from zero. We do it on the stage all the time, and we intentionally put ourselves in situations where we will fail. And then from a leadership perspective, it's how do we then do that? And we work with leaders to have them do some of these fun exercises where they're going to intentionally fail. And we say, like, you know what? If you like this, sit around a table, have once a month and do these games or do these exercises so that you have your failure and recovery reps in, or you have your yes and reps in. And then you get it in your bones. And then you get it in your sense of confidence, and you know how to lift yourself in those moments when you know things are going to go wrong. I mean, I still to this day remember when I was standing in front of 1,000 people with the chairman of Roche and something went wrong. And I was like, it's a moment to improvise. And I used my improv skills and it worked,
Wow.
right? So everyone was like, oh no, this is terribly cringe. How are we going to handle this? And we got through it because I literally used some of my improv games to make it work. Sorry, Roche. It was okay. But yeah, so I think that's really ultimately the differentiation of improv as a skill and improv as a practice, even as just a hobby that you might have in your office that will help you recover and prepare for the inevitable failure that you're going to be facing. And how are you going to get up and keep going in a moment when everyone's watching you and everyone's looking to you to keep them confident, calm, know that you have their back, because that's what we do. We have our backs in improv. We tap each other on the back before we go on stage and we say, got your back. So that's really what it's teaching you.
Right. And do you see any relationship between laughter and trust?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can't laugh with someone, can you really trust them? So one of my great teachers said, the shortest distance between two people is a laugh. So
Yeah.
again, we're all here to connect. I mean, we from the very, very beginning of our talk today, we talked about, things that drive me in terms of my purpose is, serving people, making an impact on people, patients, healthcare systems, those things. Ultimately, it's about connection. You can't do that unless you connect with others. Are you connecting with a client, a colleague, your family, your community? You got to find ways to connect. And again, finding a way to like do little bits to make people laugh, put them at ease. It's the fastest way to create rapport and to keep going, because we're not here to be comedians. We're
Mm.
here to actually build something. And if comedy can actually help you make that very quick collaboration, rapport building, connection, so that, okay, now we're on. Now biochemically we're switched on and we want to collaborate. What happens next?
You're absolutely spot on. I think one common thing I've seen across all charismatic leaders is the humor. That's what makes them so charismatic. And I wonder why some leaders take themselves too seriously.
Why does someone take themselves too seriously? That,
Yeah.
I believe, is also we're getting very deep now. Thank you for we're getting very deep now, but I think that's driven from fear.
Mm.
So I think
Insecurity.
that, perfectionism control, taking yourself too seriously, trying to over control an environment comes from trying to overcome fear. And again, if improv can help you learn how to pick up from failing, it'll also help you understand, wow, fear is just something that can be fleeting. And even the most perfectly designed systems, programs, etc., they will fail because there's always going to be some black swan that is in it that means it's going to fall apart. And what are you going to do as an individual? Whether you're capital L leader or you're leading from within, what are you going to do to respond to overcome that fear in the moment, to get up and recover, keep going for yourself and for whoever's along with you along the ride? So, yeah, I think I think, well, corporations are often really very large organizational, behavioral, psychological, organizational, behavioral learning labs, right? So you see a lot of people who are finding themselves in restructurings currently right now where they're dropping to the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they're becoming very fearful and trying to control the world around them. And I think, at that moment, leaning into curiosity, like I talked about, the why do we do ethnography? It's getting curious about a problem. So if we get curious about a problem, we're in learning mode. And if this isn't something that's happening to me, it's happening for me, we can then transform that as from being victims to actually transform that into being something that we can learn from and get up from and keep learning from and overcome a fear from. Thank you for the opportunity to be so deep.
Wow.
It's great. I didn't expect that today on our market access discussion, but great.
Yeah, I think this conversation has been so fascinating that time has just gone past so quickly. You're amazing, Jennifer.
You're amazing. Your questions are really great and extremely
Wow.
thought-provoking. So I've really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
the discussion. It's been
You're
wonderful.
very, very gracious. Very gracious. So, in terms of time, do we have another 5-10 minutes? Yeah. All right. Okay. So, one of the questions I have is, what belief do you hold today that your younger self would have disagreed with?
A belief that I hold today that my younger self would disagree with is that you can plan a linear career. Ah!
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
My younger self would have thought, because everyone that was around me was planning a linear career. And my younger self thought, oh, that's therefore I must do the same. And I think my younger self would look at me, I've often thought of that. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get inside our Back to the Future DeLorean and talk to our younger selves and say, like, hey, hold on. The story is going to unfold in a way that you never expected, therefore non-linearly. And it's going to be so much more exciting and so much more fulfilling than you ever expected. And you're going to go further than your wildest imagination. So I think that's, those things is what I would love to tell her as she looks out with big eyes into the world to say what will happen, where will I be and who will I be, and how will I make an impact in this world. I would love her to know those things.
And if you could leave listeners with one idea worth carrying into tomorrow, what would it be?
Okay, so I would say yes, and it is the magical combination of words that will change your life. And that is to say yes to the thing that's coming at you and keep building, keep collaborating, keep co-creating. Because we live in a yes, but world. Yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. It breaks the energy. It kills the collaboration. It shifts where we're going. Just by switching from yes, but to yes, and, you are almost like a sorcerer in your life, able to transform every room, every conversation, every outcome, just by doing that one thing. And I believe it changes every social unit that we're involved in: families, communities, businesses, teams. I've had so many of my students come to me to say, I learned yes and for the stage, and yes and is now the philosophy of my life, and it changed how I live. So I would say just watch yourself in the next week and say yes and instead of yes but, and watch how you change and watch how the world changes around you. And come back and put in the comments of the podcast and let us know. It'll be great for engagement as well. But come back and let us know what happened, because I think that it will give you things that you never expected.
That's a fantastic piece of advice. And I'm religiously going to follow that for a week, and we'll tell you how it goes. And we'll also put in the comments to let the audience know how it went for me. Thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of our today's conversation. Jennifer, thank you so much. And what strikes me most about your story is that it challenges a belief many of us carry that we have to choose one path, one identity, and one version of ourselves. And your journey reminds us that a meaningful life can be much more fluid than that. You can be a diplomat, an entrepreneur, a healthcare leader, and a comedian, serious about your mission and still find joy in the process. And perhaps that's the lesson. We are not here simply to become one thing, we are here to keep becoming. And thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and your perspective with us today. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Drug Diaries today.
Thank you, Shashik. It's been a wonderful day. Thank you so much.